Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and our guest today is Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. I'm glad to be here.
Great to have you as always. So the situation in Ukraine on the front lines are basically the same. There is very little progress has been made lately by either side. Russians are pushing and pushing ahead, and of course, as an attacking side, it has far more casualties.
Right.
And the number is growing. That's what Zaluzhny said, that he couldn't believe that Russia could accept such a high number of casualties on the front line.
For all we know, Sasha, the Russians are simply putting on, shall we say, the best front they can, the best appearances they can, while they are attacking themselves into exhaustion. Yeah, I keep using that analogy of George Foreman against Muhammad Ali. George Foreman was flailing away at Muhammad Ali for 6 rounds, and in the 6th round, he was exhausted, dead on his feet, and then that's why I predict that the Ukrainians in the very near future are going to come off the ropes and launch a counterpunch that will stop the Russians cold.
And you're saying that it's irrespective of help from the West, particularly the United States?
The Ukrainians are making the best use of the help that they are getting. You must understand in this case that when you're looking at the response of the various NATO members, they are not responding as a totally unified group. It's not a totally unified action. You see a number of bilateral actions on the part of individual NATO nations, NATO members, realizing that it is in their collective best interest to aid Ukraine as best they can with whatever they can spare, and in some cases whatever they've decided not to hold on to in order to benefit Ukraine. So Ukraine is getting these ad hoc, relatively unorganized and unplanned for additions to their military forces, and so it's a challenge for Ukraine to figure out the best strategy. Strategy is at its core the art of using your available ways and means to attain a specific objective. In this
and
case,
to preserve their life.
And they have to, because Ukraine's strategic objective is essentially defensive. They want to preserve their existence and repel the Russian invasion. Get that they want to continue to exist. Russia does not want them to continue to exist. Putin has made it clear that Ukraine should not exist as a separate state, and therefore that they should be. They need to be conquered in accordance with the Russian concept of security, which is безопасность, without danger. And because of Russia's history, because of their historical perceptions of what security means to them, in order for Russia to be secure, its neighbors must by definition be made to feel insecure or subordinate or even conquered. So it is a very aggressive concept of security, much more aggressive than Western nations have, because most Western nations have not been repeatedly invaded in their history, as has Russia. So to a certain extent, you can understand it, but Putin, as we have discussed before, places an excessive emphasis on their possession of nuclear weapons, of being a nuclear weapons state. Because as Boris Yeltsin had once said, the only reason Russia is considered a great power is because its armed forces have nuclear weapons. So they are using this. They call their nuclear forces their ustrashenia, intimidation forces. And that puts a much different meaning, a much different slant on things as to why they are doing what they are doing. So right now, the Ukraine is taking, because its goal is essentially defensive. They're not looking to conquer Russia. They want Russia just to leave them alone and go away. So now they are taking the available means that they have that they are getting in an unorganized, disorganized, and unpredictable fashion from various sources, and they are facing a daunting strategic challenge to integrate those available means into the best possible strategy for Ukraine in order to achieve its ultimate objective, which is its self-preservation and independence from Russia. So now it's from where I'm observing it and looking at all the information coming in, the Ukrainians are stabilizing the front. They are doing the boxing equivalent of leaning up against the ropes and allowing the other side to punch themselves out. And as the Ukrainians get these incremental improvements in certain areas, they are making very good success in both in the air defense, and in the naval sphere in the Black Sea, where they are successfully beating the Russians back. And that trend towards growing air superiority for Ukraine is only going to increase in the coming months as the F-16s are fully integrated and as other air defense measures are fully integrated. I project, from my perspective, from my own analysis, that Ukraine within the next 2 to 3 months will gain a local air superiority over the theater. On that sector, over the Crimea, as well as over the eastern sector of Ukraine, and they will therefore be in a perfect position not only to halt any further Russian offensives and make them even more prohibitively costly than they have been, but they will be in a position to throw a decisive counterpunch at a time and place of their choosing, not the Russians. So this is why I maintain, in the face of the vast majority of Western analysts and other analysts who are saying, "Oh, this is deadlocked in a stalemate," that Russia has much greater resources, which I think is something of an illusion. They are projecting strength, but they may well be nearing the end of their useful strength and resources as far as being able to prosecute a successful war against Ukraine. It's particularly once the Ukrainians are able to successfully integrate the additions to their strength that they are getting. So that is my outlook at this point is one of, shall we say, cautious optimism.
Excellent. Jonathan, there is a lot of talk about that in any future advance, Ukrainian need to destroy Crimean Bridge.
That is, you and I have discussed this before. That it from my perspective, just looking at it from my wargaming perspective and my long history of analyzing war games and so forth of various types, that is what Clausewitz would call a center of gravity. That is a crucial center of gravity for the Russians, because if that bridge from Russia to Crimea is effectively destroyed and rendered permanently out of action, the Russians will have lost their ability to logistically reinforce the Crimea. Their occupation forces will be cut off. And those Russian occupation forces in Crimea will then be highly vulnerable to Ukrainian counterstroke with its available reserve forces, which they still maintain, you note. They still have a significant reserve force, which they can commit at a time and place of their choosing. So as their air superiority grows, and as the Ukrainians are able to successfully integrate these additions to their strength from various Western nations, they are looking into planning the time and place to launch that decisive counterstroke. I would project the most logical candidate would be at that bridge, to take that bridge out permanently and then use that as a prelude to launching a decisive counteroffensive into Crimea, which will restore Crimea to Ukrainian control and thereby inflict a visible, undeniable, and defeat upon the Russian forces, which the Russians will not be able to explain away or excuse.
So there is a lot of talk lately that obviously Ukraine need weapons such as either a Storm Shadow or Taurus, and the Germans now refuse to provide Taurus. So British offer exchange X number of Taurus for Storm Shadow, and then they would supply this way to Ukraine the needed weapons.
You notice you notice there's a whole lot of horse trading,
Yeah,
informal horse trading of and we'll give you this. Well, maybe we can work this. There are all sorts of bilateral deals that Ukraine, to its credit, is very flexibly negotiating with the other side. And we'll give you this. Hey, there may be some behind the scenes agreements too. And it said, if you give us this, we'll give you certain rights in Ukraine, basing rights and other future agreements. Just help bail us out of this situation now.
there will be a lot of infrastructure projects once the war is over.
Yes. Yes, there will be a lot of things that the Western nations and allies that support Ukraine now will be rewarded for once the conflict is successfully concluded in Ukraine's favor and, by extension, NATO's favor as well. There's going to be a lot of compensation. I predict a lot of compensation and horse trading and, quid pro quo going on here. That phrase has been beaten to death over the past few years, quid pro quo, but it's accurate in this case. There's going to be a lot of quid pro quo trading going on between Ukraine and its Western supporters.
Absolutely. Jonathan, one very interesting question I have, and I don't,
Oh, goody.
I don't have a clearly defined answer to that. Remember a few years ago, Trump criticized NATO countries for not spending 2% on their defense or so on. I think he was right. It's a form where how he presented it. I would disagree with it, but it doesn't matter. What now is a situation when a lot of Western countries are spending a lot of money helping Ukraine. Is that part of this 2%, or it's a separate?
It's from if you're looking at it from Trump's perspective, the NATO is doing what it ought to be doing. You're giving it the requisite more of their 2% because it is in their collective interest to do so. Yeah, he's not going to be coming out and saying, "Well, I told you so," but in effect, by NATO starting to act more or less collectively in defense of Ukraine, as if Ukraine were an active part of NATO, which it might as well be at this point. So it's Mr. Trump is doing the politically astute thing. Yeah, he's holding off on that, and you will note that this is something that you can speculate on, which a number of people are speculating on now. You note that Mr. Elon Musk, the billionaire head of SpaceX, had a meeting with Mr. Trump very recently, the past day or so.
Yep.
And the discussions were not disclosed. What they discussed was not disclosed, which I will say it was a very clever move on the part of both men, because it also, Mr. Musk's views are pretty well known because he has made no secret about it. Mr. Trump's views are very well known, and each man has something that the other wants.
Jonathan, there is a little bit suspicious timing of that meeting. It was a couple of days before Trump had to post a bond of $91.5 million.
Right. I'm not going to swear to it or anything like that. That could have been one of the things they discussed. It would be a logical thing for them both to have discussed. There could be other considerations as well. Remember that Mr. Trump was the one who created the existence of the Space Force. And you and I have discussed the potential importance of the Space Force, particularly if it is upgraded with a space fleet. That is something that Mr. Musk could do for Mr. Trump, should Mr. Trump win the election. And so there are very good reasons for those two men to be talking to each other. And even better reasons for them not to talk about what they discussed, because it's always good to At the heart of deterrence is to keep your opponent uncertain about what is going on in your opponent's mind. So this time, by essentially keeping mum about what they are discussing, they are creating maximum uncertainty, not only in the minds of their political opposition in the United States, but they are also creating maximum uncertainty in the minds of our potential adversaries. What are those two up to?
Go and figure.
Go figure, right.
That's right. There is another story is that once Trump will be announced as a nominee for Republican Party, which will be probably in July, I think, then he would be part of the briefings on international politics or so on.
That is correct. Yeah.
That's correct, and nothing unusual about that, except
No.
now it's been uncovered an information. I'm not so sure if I can say confirmed information, but it's flying around, and at some point it will be dealt with one way or another, is that connection of his bond of $91,500 provided by Chubb, and the Chubb's the CEO, he was many times in Russia, very friendly with top Russian people, and its Russian connection is being now brought up more and more. And although at this point it's nothing concrete and nothing that you can touch it and bring it to the bank, but it's flying around, and I'm wondering if more substantial information and proven facts will become available, how you will play a card that the nominee for a Republican Party is essentially jeopardized by this transaction, and then when he will be briefed, although it was already voiced that the briefings are oral briefings only, so Trump will not get access.
He's not going to get actual documents or things
That's
like
right,
that.
yeah.
Yeah,
so
that's merely being prudent.
Yeah, okay. So that would have to be mitigated. But I think we have to wait for more information. And now, coming to previous question, the NATO countries, first of all, most NATO countries today paying, 2% or more. Now, even those who pay less than 2%, but provide a lot of help to Ukraine, and because Ukraine is in war with Russia, and the whole purpose of NATO was to deal with the Russian potential war against NATO countries, and by helping Ukraine there, essentially making Russia weaker and weaker. So this is money so well spent, maybe even better than build a couple of new tanks.
Well, if you recall, some said that the original purpose of NATO was to keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. Now that last part no longer applies quite so much, but the first two, they want to keep NATO wants to keep the Americans in and involved as the strongest guarantor of any future Russian aggression against NATO Europe. And keeping the Germans down is, the Germans have demonstrated they are sufficiently reformed and well behaved that they no longer have to worry about the resurgence of an imperial Germany. That's not in the cards.
No, I totally agree with you. And what do you think about the recent trip and meeting of Orban and Trump? Do you think that there is a potential of a new alliance between Trump, Orban, and Putin, especially because of the recent trip of Tucker Carlson, who visited both Orban and Putin?
This is looking more and more like a political kabuki dance. It really is. So, I mean, a lot of this public political maneuvering and meetings and so forth are done, I would say, for the benefit of their own political constituencies. It is not evidence of a decisive move one way or the other, or a change in strategy. So I would say that you take these recent meetings with a grain of salt. After all, Mr. Putin did not dare launch an offensive against Ukraine while Mr. Trump was president. We note that. So those who say that that Trump is somehow in Putin's pocket, no, not quite.
Not, and also in which pocket, left or right? Nobody knows.
Exactly.
But something strikes me. Okay, Trump, with all his shortcomings, he, as a leader of Republican Party, he can do quite well against the Biden and the Democrats, simply because Biden and Democrats had a lot of problems in the last years. Although it's improving now, the economy is doing a little bit better. Why does he need all the theatricals like Orban, Putin, and all that garbage? Why does he need that? Because he can win legitimate second term without all those antics. Don't you think so?
Well, again, because I cannot put myself in the mind of Mr. Trump or his political opponents. Right now, Mr. Trump's primary politically strategic concern is the consolidation and energizing of his own political base. And that is his concern between now and November, energizing his own base and reaching out to as many of the undecideds as possible, what few there are, to see if they can consolidate and win. That his primary concern is winning that election in November. And what he wants to do is create the circumstances which will make that probability as high as possible. Now, polls would suggest that the trends are moving in his direction. Potential Supreme Court decisions in the near to intermediate future may also well further increase his chances and negate many of the so-called legal cases against him. So right now, my attitude is a wait and see. It's because you could try to overthink this and just drive yourself crazy, trying to read significance into every single political move or speech or trip that a candidate or an incumbent makes. So, but in this case, in the case of Ukraine, as I have contended several times in the past, Ukraine still largely controls its own destiny, and
Yes.
they are making, in my opinion, they are making the best use of their available means and tailoring them to the forces and the resources that they have, taking advantage of their opponent's mistakes and weaknesses, and all of this is adding up to, I would say, within the next several months, will be, to many observers in the West, it will be an unexpected surprise counteroffensive by the Ukrainians, delivered by the Ukrainians at a time and place of their choosing. And that is the essence of surprise. We seem to think that because we have both sides have all these intelligence resources, and you hear all this talk about strategy from various experts, that they somehow know exactly what is going on. We don't. We don't know everything that is going on, certainly not behind the scenes. And one of the key elements involved in achieving operational surprise is knowing not only how your opponent thinks, but also concealing and keeping your opponents uncertain as to what you are thinking and planning. And that is what the Ukrainians are in large measure doing. Zelensky conceded that for last year's counteroffensive, Ukrainian counteroffensive, one of the reasons that he said that it failed was that because Russia knew about their plans too far in advance and were planning and were taking appropriate countermeasures. So this time, Zelensky is playing his cards much closer to the vest, and he is saying that although successfully resisting, that there will be some surprises in store for Russia this summer, which I agree. He's just keeping quiet about just when, where, and how these specific surprises will be launched.
Well, one surprise just happened, I think, yesterday when in Ukraine there are forces consisting of Russians.
Mm-hmm.
and they're part of Ukrainian army, but they're in kind of a separate brigade, and they unleashed very strong advance yesterday on Kursk and Belgorod, and they are doing quite well on Russians completely were unprepared to do that, and they've got substantial territory, and they're not avoiding the tactical skirmishes with Russian army, but there is not much Russian army either, because the whole Russian army is tied up in Crimea and south and east of Ukraine. So they can march quite a bit. You remember what's happened a few months ago with Prigozhin, when they march right in the middle of Russia from Rostov to Moscow without much resistance. So right now they're doing excessively well. Well, we'll see what's happened, because they will need reinforcement. They will need, of course, a lot of things. Or maybe they will just turn around and go back to Ukraine.
Or pull back to their original position. We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know that. But I think one of the ideas, the same as with drones, Ukrainians want to bring war to Russia and to Russians as much as it's possible. Okay, they're not going to use Western the weapons to attack Russians. Okay, they will use their own Ukrainians' weapons. And for this purpose, Ukrainian weapons are doing a pretty good job, same as drones, same as what's happened to the Black Sea Fleet. Recently, right now, there is no such thing as the Russian Black Sea Fleet. It's hiding in Azov Sea and Novorossiysk and elsewhere. So Ukrainians with limited means, as we discussed, they're doing very, very well, and we'll just see what's happening. I'm just very scary about the next few days because of the Russian election. And the Russians, they like to have some kind of pleasant surprises for their Führer. One was October 7th, his birthday date, and there was an attack by Hamas against Israel. And now with the election, which Putin will win, by most count 100% certainty, whether the Russians will not surprise Ukraine with some kind of a unexpected attack or advance or whatever. But hopefully, well, there are very few days left before the election. So just each day, the likelihood is getting lesser and lesser, of course. Hopefully, it will not materialize. I really do believe so. Well, with that, Jonathan, I thank you very, very much for your input on today's program. Sorry for some uncomfortable questions, but they're uncomfortable to myself as well. We're both struggling.
It wouldn't be a war or political if there weren't uncomfortable questions to be dealt with.
That's
But
right.
fortunately for us, the other side also has uncomfortable questions that they have to deal with, and uncomfortable realities. And the Ukrainians are doing their very best to make life as uncomfortable for the Russians as possible.
Yeah, they're great at that. And with a little more help from the West, I think nothing will help Russians to survive this war against Ukraine. With that, thank you so much, everybody. Jonathan, thank you so much. And we'll see you same place, same time on Friday. Bye-bye, everybody.
Looking forward.
Slava
Bye.
Ukraine.